increase in adverse health effects, exposed populations have to adapt, coping mechanisms and vulnerable groups are severely affected. And above 55 dBA, we have adverse health effects occurring frequently. Now, I imagine many of you are familiar with what's going on up in the thumb. People in that area who are at the distances, who are living closest to the turbines, are exposed routinely to about 40 to 48 dBA. In spite of what has been said that this is not causing any problems, many of those people are having severe sleep problems and other types of health effects, which I guess I'm not going to get into in detail, but it has also led to litigation. For a community that is looking at new standards, do you really want to adopt the same standards that have already been shown to be a problem in other communities? I don't think so. I think we should learn from history, not repeat it. Next slide. This slide requires a little bit of explanation. In late 2009, the American Wind Energy Association, in conjunction with the Canadian Wind Energy Association, published a white paper called Wind Turbine Sound and Health Effects, an expert panel review. There were about 8 different experts assigned onto it. Dr. Jeff Leventhal, who we saw his quote earlier, was one of them. In fact, he was probably the principal author of that document. Dr. Robert McCunney, who is a Harvard Medical School professor, was also one of those authors. When he was, in terms of that paper, they concluded that 45 dBA LEQ outside your home will not cause an adverse health effect, and that it was acceptable for use in setting guidelines. However, last summer, he participated in a seminar where he was asked, if it was your home, what level would you want? And his response was, below 35 decibels. So, the people who are telling you that it's 45 is okay for your home don't want it for theirs. And I think you really need to understand that. If some of the people who are advocating 45 decibels were also going to be the ones with the wind turbine in their backyard, they would not be any more excited to have them than Dr. McCunney. This is taken from a brief where he was basically sworn testimony, where he was confronted with a transcript from the seminar and agreed that yes, indeed, he had said that, and that his statement below 35 decibels was based upon all of the information that he had used to conclude that 45 LEQ was acceptable if it was your home. Next slide. Now let's talk about the World Health Organization's 1999. We heard a little bit in the last presentation about DBA, DBC, and how DBC is an absolutely erroneous way to measure things. Well, in 1999, and this was before the new research came in, the World Health Organization stated that if the outdoor noise has a strong low-frequency component, and they say here, for example, from ventilation systems or wind turbines, that will disturb rest and sleep even at low sound levels, a lower limit should be recommended. Now remember, Mr. Goldberg said 45 dBA was for the recommendation of WHO, but if there's low frequency components, they're recommending 30. They also recommend that measures based on A weighting are inappropriate. Since A weighting underestimates the sound pressure level of noise with low frequency components, a better assessment of health effects would be to use C weighting. It should be noted that a large proportion of low frequency components in the noise may increase considerably the adverse effects on health. And the evidence, and this is 1999, on low frequency noise is sufficiently strong to warrant immediate concern. Now we just heard a presentation in which DBC was stated as something that was used that inappropriately included low frequency noise. Well, I beg to differ, and the World Health Organization supports me on that. It is the proper way of measuring a sound that has low frequency components. Next slide. We also heard that wind turbines do not produce infrasound. This again is the delta study. Infrasound is the range basically right down in here. This is the low frequency sounds, our speech range. Hisses, clicks, birds, and insects are up here. The sound level, as we go up, is increasing. So what we're looking at here is a spectrum from a study of 41 different wind turbines, showing that the dominant energy produced by a wind turbine is infrasound and low frequency noise. It is not, I'm getting there. Wind turbines are low frequency noise producers. When we measure them with A weighting, what we're doing is actually only looking at this part of the record right here, that portion, which would give us a sense that that sound is going to be roughly, well, 95, 110, 15 decibels quieter than it really is. Next slide. Going back to this diagram again. Now remember I said this curve right here is the threshold of audibility. Here's the spectrum showing the wind turbine sound, and we can see that indeed over here this little tail is below that threshold of audibility. So let's look at this for a second. Next slide. Actually, go back one. When we talk about the threshold of perception, this curve, this is derived in a laboratory condition where a person, if you've ever had a hearing test where you put the headset on, you listen for the beeps, and when you can hear it, you tell them, okay, I hear that, and then they plot your hearing thresholds. This is done the same way, except the sounds being presented are steady tones and single tones in the very infrasonic range. One of the things we know is that the hearing ability of people is least sensitive to pure tones that are steady. If you have a complex tone, set of tones, and we'll look at that with wind turbines later, but if the sound that you're listening to is not a steady pure tone, but instead a modulated or multiple tones, it could be that the hearing threshold's down here. We don't know. No one's ever done these studies. So, next slide. We just know that we're lower than that threshold. We also talked earlier, we heard a little discussion on the EPA Levels document. That came out in 1973. In 1980, the EPA was defunded to do any work on noise, so this has never been updated. But what they said, or what they found, was that for urban and suburban residents with prior experience to high levels of community noise, a sound level of 55 LDN was considered to be acceptable. That's 55 dBA in the day, 45 dBA at night. However, there's a whole appendix to that document that is often overlooked. That appendix shows you how to adjust the values for urban, suburban residents with prior exposure to high levels of noise to rural residents with no prior exposure to high levels of noise. And when you apply those corrections, the EPA Levels document shows that the recommended level is 35 dBA during the day and 25 dBA at night for rural communities. Not 45, but 35 in the day and 25 at night. Next slide. As I said earlier, the EPA was defunded in 1980. Since after that point, the Levels document was taken up by an American National Standards Institute committee as 12.9, in which a standard, Part 4, basically updated and modernized the EPA Levels document. What that standard shows is that it provides methods to assess environmental sounds and to predict the potential annoyance response of a community to outdoor long-term noise from any and all types of environmental sounds from one or more discrete or distributed sound sources. Now, when